I was 62 years old when my world collapsed in a single phone call on a Tuesday morning in March. The coffee maker was gurgling its familiar tune in the kitchen, filling the air with that rich, bitter aroma that had started my mornings for the past 30 years. Sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains of my suburban Denver home, casting warm golden patterns across the hardwood floor I had installed with my own hands decades ago. The house felt peaceful, almost sacred in its morning quietude, with only the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of sprinklers watering Mrs. Chen's garden next door. Then the phone rang. The sharp electronic trill cut through the tranquil morning like a knife through silk. I reached for the cordless phone on the kitchen counter, my fingers still slightly damp from rinsing my coffee mug. The caller ID displayed a number I didn't recognize, but something in my chest tightened as I pressed the green button. "Hello, this is Margaret," I said, my voice carrying the practiced warmth I had perfected during 25 years as an elementary school librarian. "Mrs. Margaret Henderson?" The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, cold as winter rain. "Yes, this is she. This is Detective James Morrison with the Denver Police Department, Financial Crimes Division. Ma'am, I need you to come down to the station. There have been some serious allegations made against you regarding fraudulent financial activities." The words hit me like a physical blow. My knees suddenly felt weak, and I gripped the counter's edge, feeling the cool granite beneath my palm. The morning sunlight that had seemed so welcoming moments before now felt harsh and exposing. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Ma'am, your daughter Sarah Henderson filed a complaint yesterday afternoon. She's provided evidence that you've been accessing her bank accounts without authorization and transferring funds to your personal accounts over the past 18 months. The total amount we're looking at is approximately $73,000. The phone slipped from my trembling fingers and clattered onto the tile floor. The detective's voice continued emanating from the speaker, but the words became a meaningless buzz as blood rushed in my ears like ocean waves. "Sarah. My Sarah. My youngest daughter, the one I had rocked to sleep every night until she was 7, the one who used to braid dandelions into my hair during summer picnics, the one who called me every Sunday without fail for the past 15 years. I bent down to retrieve the phone, my joints protesting with familiar aches, and brought it back to my ear with a shaking hand. "Detective Morrison, there must be some mistake. I would never, ever steal from my daughter. I don't even have access to her accounts. Ma'am, I understand this is difficult, but we have documentation. Bank records, transaction histories, digital signatures. I really need you to come in so we can sort this out. Can you be here by 2 o'clock this afternoon?" The rest of the conversation passed in a haze. I heard myself agreeing to the meeting, writing down the address, confirming that I understood the seriousness of the situation. But my mind was spinning like a tornado, trying to grasp how this could be happening. How could Sarah believe I was capable of such a thing? How could she go to the police without even calling me first? After hanging up, I stood in my kitchen for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, staring at the sunlit patterns on the floor that now seemed like prison bars. The coffee maker had finished its cycle, and the silence felt oppressive, loaded with the weight of accusation and betrayal. I needed to understand. I needed to call Sarah. My fingers fumbled as I scrolled through my contacts, finding her name with the little heart emoji I had added years ago. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring felt like an eternity, and when her voicemail picked up, my heart sank further into my chest. "Hi, you've reached Sarah. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." Her voice, so familiar and dear, now sounded distant and foreign. "Sarah, honey, it's Mom. The police just called me. There's been some terrible misunderstanding. Please call me back immediately. I love you, sweetheart. We need to talk about this." I set the phone down and walked to the living room on legs that felt like they were made of lead. The family photos lining the mantelpiece seemed to mock me now. There was Sarah at age 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding the first-place ribbon from her school's spelling bee. There she was at 16, radiant in her prom dress, the midnight blue satin that we had spent 3 weekends shopping for. And there, my favorite, from her wedding day just 2 years ago, both of us crying happy tears as we embraced outside the little chapel in Boulder. How had we gotten from there to here? I sank into my well-worn recliner, the one Robert had bought me for my 60th birthday, its familiar embrace offering little comfort now. The fabric still held the faint scent of his aftershave, though he had been gone for 3 years. God, how I missed him in this moment. Robert would have known what to do. He always knew what to do. The morning stretched ahead of me like a vast, unknowable territory. I tried calling Sarah 3 more times, each attempt going straight to voicemail. I tried calling my older daughter, Jessica, but she was in meetings all day at her law firm in Seattle. I considered calling my sister Ruth, but the thought of explaining this humiliation made my stomach churn. Instead, I found myself walking to the small desk in my bedroom where I kept all my financial records. Robert had always handled our finances, but after his death, I had been forced to learn about bank statements, investment accounts, and retirement funds. Everything was meticulously organized in labeled folders, exactly as he had taught me. I pulled out my bank statements from the past 18 months, spreading them across the dining room table like pieces of a puzzle I desperately needed to solve. The numbers swam before my eyes as I tried to trace every deposit, every withdrawal, every transaction. My teacher's pension, my small social security check, the occasional grocery store run, the monthly payment to Sunny Acres where my mother lived in assisted care. Everything was accounted for, everything was normal, everything was exactly as it should be. So where were these mysterious transfers the detective had mentioned? Where was the $73,000 that I had supposedly stolen from my own child? The answer, I realized with growing horror, might lie in something I hadn't considered. Something I had done out of love, out of trust, out of a mother's desire to help her struggling daughter. 2 years ago, when Sarah and her husband Mark were buying their first house, they had asked me to co-sign on the mortgage. Their credit wasn't perfect, they explained, and they needed someone with a solid financial history to help them qualify for the loan they wanted. I had agreed without hesitation. What mother wouldn't want to help her child achieve the American dream of home ownership? But co-signing had required more than just my signature. The bank had insisted on linking our accounts for easier transaction processing. I had access to their joint checking account, and they had access to mine. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement, just until they could refinance in their own names. But somehow, in the chaos of their new marriage and new house, we had all forgotten about those linked accounts. Could someone have used those connections to move money around? Could there have been some kind of banking error that made it look like I was transferring funds? Or worse, could Mark have done something and made it appear as though the transactions came from me? The thought sent ice through my veins. I had never fully warmed to Mark, though I had tried for Sarah's sake. There was something about him that felt slick, too polished, like a car salesman who smiled too much. He worked in financial services, something with investment planning, and he always spoke in terms I didn't quite understand about portfolios and market volatility and leveraging opportunities. Sarah had met him at a coffee shop in downtown Denver, where she worked as a graphic designer. She had been immediately smitten by his confidence, his expensive suits, his talk of future plans and financial security. After her previous relationship had ended badly, she was hungry for stability, for someone who seemed to have his life together. But I had noticed things. The way he would check his phone constantly during family dinners. The way he would steer conversations away from his own family background. The way he had pushed for the joint account setup, insisting it was the most efficient way to handle the mortgage process. At the time, I had attributed my unease to typical mother-in-law protectiveness. Now, I wondered if my instincts had been trying to warn me about something more sinister. The hours crawled by until it was time to leave for the police station. I changed into my most respectable outfit, a navy blue blazer and matching slacks that I usually reserved for church on important holidays. My hands shook as I applied lipstick, and I had to grip the bathroom counter to steady myself. The face looking back at me from the mirror seemed older than it had that morning, etched with lines of worry and confusion that hadn't been there before. The drive to the police station passed in a blur of familiar streets that now felt foreign and threatening. Every stoplight, every turn, brought me closer to a confrontation I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. I parked in the visitor lot, my Honda Civic looking small and vulnerable among the patrol cars and official vehicles. The police station smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glare. The desk sergeant, a woman about my age with tired eyes, directed me to wait in a small room with plastic chairs and motivational posters about community safety. Detective Morrison turned out to be a tall, lean man in his 40s with graying temples and a kind but serious expression. He led me to an interview room that felt more like a doctor's office than anything sinister from television, with comfortable chairs and a box of tissues on the table. "Mrs. Henderson, thank you for coming in," he said, settling into his chair with a manila folder thick with documents. "I want you to know that this is just a preliminary interview. You're not under arrest, and you're free to leave at any time. Do you understand?" "Yes," I managed, though my mouth felt as dry as desert sand. "Can you tell me about your relationship with your daughter Sarah?" The question caught me off guard. I had expected him to start with bank records and numbers, not with the most precious relationship in my life. "Sarah is my youngest daughter. She's 28 years old, married for 2 years. She's a graphic designer, very talented. She lives about 15 minutes from me here in Denver. We're very close. We talk several times a week, have dinner together at least once a month. She's the light of my life, Detective Morrison. The absolute light of my life." My voice broke slightly on the last words, and I reached for one of the tissues. "When was the last time you spoke with her?" "Last Sunday. We had our usual weekly call. She told me about a new client she was excited about, some local restaurant that wanted a complete branding package. She seemed happy, normal. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, that would suggest she thought I was stealing from her." Detective Morrison nodded, making notes in a small notebook. "Mrs. Henderson, are you aware that you have access to your daughter's bank accounts?" "Well, yes, but only because of the mortgage co-signing situation. When they bought their house 2 years ago, the bank required us to link our accounts temporarily. It was supposed to be a short-term arrangement." "Did you ever use that access to transfer money from her accounts to yours?" "No, Detective. Never. I wouldn't even know how to do that online. I barely know how to check my own balance on the computer." He slid a sheet of paper across the table toward me. "This is a record of electronic transfers from Sarah and Mark's joint checking account to your personal account over the past 18 months. Can you explain these?" My hands trembled as I picked up the document. The page was covered with rows of numbers and dates, each line showing a transfer from their account to mine. The amounts varied from $500 to $3,000, and they occurred with disturbing regularity, sometimes twice a month. "I don't understand this at all," I whispered, staring at the papers. "I never authorized these transfers. I never even knew they were happening." "Mrs. Henderson, these transactions all show your digital signature and were initiated from an IP address associated with your home internet connection." The room felt like it was spinning. "That's impossible. I don't even know what a digital signature is, let alone how to make one. Is there anyone else who has access to your computer? Anyone who might have your banking passwords?" I thought carefully, trying to remember who had been in my house, who might have used my computer. "Well, Sarah has been over many times. And Mark. They've both used my computer when theirs was being repaired, or when they needed to print something. But Detective, you have to understand, they're my family. I trusted them completely. Have you noticed any unusual activity in your own accounts? Large deposits that you couldn't explain?" I shook my head. "No, nothing like that. My finances are very simple. Pension, Social Security, a small savings account. Nothing complicated." Detective Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying me with eyes that seemed to see everything. "Mrs. Henderson, I have to tell you, this case is unusual. In most financial fraud cases involving family members, the victims are elderly parents, and the perpetrators are adult children who have gained access to their accounts. But here, we have an adult child claiming her mother is stealing from her." "But I'm not stealing from her." The words came out louder than I intended, and I immediately felt embarrassed by my outburst. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to raise my voice. This is just so overwhelming. I understand.
Can you think of any reason why Sarah would believe you were taking money from her account?
The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle.
Could there be a reason? Had I done something, said something, that might have made Sarah suspicious?
My mind raced through our recent conversations, looking for clues I might have missed.
Detective, may I ask you something?
Of course.
When Sarah filed this complaint, did she seem upset? Angry? Or was she more matter-of-fact about it?
He considered the question carefully.
She was definitely emotional.
Very upset, actually. She said she had been struggling financially for months and couldn't understand where her money was going. When she finally looked closely at her bank statements, she found these transfers and recognized your account number from the mortgage paperwork.
Did she mention her husband? Mark? Why do you ask?
I hesitated, not wanting to sound like I was grasping at straws or trying to deflect blame onto an innocent person.
It's just that Mark handles most of their financial affairs.
He works in finance, and Sarah has always said she's not good with numbers.
If someone was going to notice unusual account activity, it would probably be him.
Detective Morrison made another note. We'll need to interview him as well, of course.
This investigation is just beginning.
We talked for another hour, going through my financial history, my computer usage, my relationship with both Sarah and Mark. I signed papers allowing them to access my bank records and computer files. I gave them permission to do whatever they needed to do to get to the truth. But as I drove home in the late afternoon sunlight, I felt more confused and frightened than when I had arrived. Someone had been stealing money from my daughter, and somehow, all the evidence pointed to me. The woman who had taught her to ride a bicycle, who had stayed up all night when she had pneumonia at age 10, who had helped her choose her wedding dress and cried tears of joy at her ceremony.
How do you prove your innocence when you don't even understand how you could appear guilty? That evening, I called Jessica in Seattle.
My older daughter had always been the practical one, the problem solver, the one who inherited her father's logical mind and steady nerves.
Mom, slow down.
You're not making much sense, Jessica said after I had poured out the whole story in a breathless rush. I could hear her moving around her apartment, probably making dinner while she talked. The normalcy of the background sounds made me feel even more isolated in my crisis. They think I've been stealing from Sarah, Jessie.
The police think I'm a criminal. Okay, first things first. You need a lawyer. Do not talk to the police again without legal representation. I'm going to call around and find you someone good in Denver.
I can't afford a lawyer, honey.
You know my finances are tight.
Mom, you can't afford not to have a lawyer.
This is serious.
They're talking about $73,000.
That's felony territory. The word felony hit me like a slap.
I had never even gotten a speeding ticket in my entire life, and now I was facing felony charges.
Jessie, do you think Sarah really believes I did this?
There was a long pause on the other end of the line.
Mom, I don't know. Sarah's been different since she married Mark. More distant, more secretive.
When I talked to her at Christmas, she seemed stressed about money, but she wouldn't go into details.
Different how?
She used to call me all the time, just to chat about random things. But over the past year, our conversations have become shorter, more superficial. And when I've suggested getting together, just the two of us, she always has an excuse.
This was news to me. Jessica and Sarah had always been close despite their 4-year age difference.
They had shared clothes and secrets and inside jokes that often left me feeling like an outsider to their sisterly bond.
Do you think Mark could be behind this somehow?
I don't want to jump to conclusions, but Mom, I never liked him.
There's something about him that doesn't sit right with me. He's too smooth, too charming.
And he always seems to be steering Sarah away from family conversations. We talked until nearly midnight, Jessica helping me make a list of everything I could remember about the account setup, the conversations with Sarah and Mark, any unusual incidents over the past 2 years that might be relevant.
By the time I hung up, I felt less alone but no less terrified. I barely slept that night.
Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Detective Morrison's serious face, heard Sarah's voicemail message playing on repeat, imagined myself in handcuffs being led away from my home. At 3 in the morning, I got up and made myself a cup of chamomile tea, sitting at my kitchen table in my robe and slippers, staring out at the empty street where nothing moved except an occasional cat.
The next morning brought no relief.
Jessica called early to give me the name and number of a criminal defense attorney named Patricia Wells, who had agreed to see me that afternoon. I spent the morning gathering every financial document I could find, creating a timeline of events, trying to prepare myself for more questions I couldn't answer. Patricia Wells turned out to be a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her office was in a renovated Victorian house downtown, with tall windows and antique furniture that made it feel more like a library than a law firm. "Mrs. Henderson," she said after I had explained the situation, "this case has some unusual elements that work in your favor. First, your age and background make you an unlikely candidate for this type of financial crime.
Second, the sophistication of the transaction suggests someone with more technical knowledge than you appear to possess. Third, and most importantly, you have no apparent motive." "What do you mean?"
"Well, according to the police report, the money transferred to your account never stayed there. It was immediately moved to other accounts or withdrawn in cash."
"If you were stealing from your daughter, where did the money go?"
"You're not living an extravagant lifestyle, you haven't made any large purchases, you haven't paid off any debts.
So where are the proceeds of this alleged crime?"
I stared at her, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in 24 hours.
"I never thought about that."
"You're right, I never saw any of that money."
"That's what we need to figure out. Someone was using your identity to steal from your daughter, but that someone wasn't benefiting you.
Which means this is either a case of identity theft, or someone close to the situation was using your access for their own purposes." We spent 2 hours going through every detail, every document, every interaction I could remember. Patricia took notes in a leather-bound notebook, occasionally stopping to ask clarifying questions that revealed angles I hadn't considered. "I'm going to hire a private investigator," she said finally. "We need to trace exactly where that money went after it left your account. We also need to examine your computer and your internet activity to see if someone else was using your identity online."
"How much is this all going to cost?"
I asked, though I knew I had no choice but to pay whatever it took.
"Don't worry about that right now. If we can prove you're a victim rather than a perpetrator, there may be ways to recover costs.
The important thing is to establish your innocence before this goes any further." I left Patricia's office feeling cautiously optimistic, but that optimism evaporated when I returned home to find a silver BMW parked in my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see 2 figures sitting in my backyard patio chairs, Sarah and Mark. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked through the house to the back door. Sarah was turned away from me, her auburn hair catching the afternoon sunlight just as it had when she was a little girl. Mark sat across from her, his expensive suit somehow managing to look casual and intimidating at the same time.
"Sarah?" I called through the screen door.
She turned, and I saw that her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Despite everything, my first instinct was to run to her, to hold her, to comfort my baby girl. But Mark placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion.
"We need to talk."
I stepped onto the patio, my legs unsteady. The afternoon air was warm and sweet with the scent of honeysuckle from the fence line, a cruel mockery of the tension crackling between us.
"Sarah, honey, there's been some terrible mistake.
I would never steal from you.
You have to know that."
She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring around and around her finger.
"Mom, they showed me the bank records.
It's your account number, your digital signature, your IP address."
"How do you explain that?" "I can't explain it, because I didn't do it.
Someone else must have access to my information somehow." Mark leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious but sympathetic.
"Margaret, I understand this is difficult, but the evidence is pretty clear.
These transfers have been happening for over a year. Sarah and I have been struggling to pay our bills, wondering where our money was going, and now we know."
"Mark, you handle all the finances. Didn't you notice these transfers when they were happening?"
His jaw tightened slightly.
"I trusted the account reconciliation to Sarah.
She's usually very good with tracking our expenses.
Sarah looked up sharply. What do you mean, usually very good? You never let me handle the finances. You always say I'm too scattered, too emotional to deal with numbers. An uncomfortable silence fell over the patio.
I watched Mark's face carefully, noticing a slight flush creeping up his neck.
Sarah, I said gently, when was the first time you looked at your bank statements and noticed these transfers? Just this week.
Mark suggested I should start taking more responsibility for our finances, so he gave me the login information. That's when I saw all these transfers to your account.
And before that, you never looked at the statements yourself? Mark always took care of everything. He said it was easier that way, less confusing.
She looked between Mark and me, her face showing the first signs of uncertainty.
Mark stood abruptly. I don't like the direction this conversation is taking.
Margaret, I think you need to accept responsibility for what you've done and figure out how to pay us back.
Mark, I said, rising to face him, I want you to look me in the eye and tell me you believe I'm capable of stealing from my own daughter. He met my gaze steadily.
People do desperate things when they're facing financial pressure. Your husband's medical bills before he died, your mother's care facility costs, living on a fixed income in an expensive city. I can understand how it might have seemed like borrowed money rather than stolen money.
The casual cruelty of his words took my breath away.
Using Robert's illness, my mother's needs, my own financial vulnerabilities as evidence of criminal motive.
But what struck me even more was how smoothly he had delivered the explanation, as if he had been rehearsing it. Sarah, I said, ignoring Mark completely, do you remember when you were 12 years old, and you took $20 from my purse to buy a birthday present for your friend Amanda? Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. Yes. And what did I do when I found out?
You sat me down and explained why taking money without asking was wrong, even when I had good intentions.
You made me return the present and apologize to Amanda.
Then you gave me extra chores so I could earn the money to buy a proper gift.
That's right. I taught you that stealing is wrong no matter what the reason, no matter who gets hurt. Do you really think I would do something I taught you was fundamentally wrong? Do you think I would steal from you, my own child, and lie about it to your face?
Sarah was crying openly now, but she wouldn't answer me. Mark moved closer to her chair, his hand possessively on her shoulder.
Margaret, emotional manipulation isn't going to change the facts. The money is gone, and all the evidence points to you. Then where is it? I asked. If I stole $73,000, where did I put it? What did I buy? What debts did I pay? Show me what I did with this money I supposedly took. Mark's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but I caught it. That's for you to explain to the police. No, Mark. That's for someone to explain to the police. But it won't be me, because I didn't take the money. Someone else did, someone who had access to both my information and Sarah's account. Someone who knew how to move money around without leaving obvious traces. Someone with financial expertise.
The accusation hung in the air like a storm cloud. Sarah looked up at her husband with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of confusion and dawning suspicion.
Mark, she said slowly, how exactly did you suggest I should start handling our finances? What made you decide now was the right time?
Sarah, don't be ridiculous.
You're upset and you're looking for someone else to blame.
But Sarah was studying his face now, and I could see her mind working.
The timing is weird, isn't it? You've always insisted on handling everything yourself, and then suddenly, right after money starts disappearing, you want me to take over? Why didn't you notice these transfers when they were happening?
I trusted your mother.
I never thought to look for that kind of activity. But you look at everything else so carefully.
You notice when I spend $5 at Starbucks without telling you. Mark's composure was cracking.
Sarah, you're being emotional.
We came here to confront your mother about her theft, not to attack me. I stepped closer to my daughter.
Sarah, honey, I want you to think carefully. Over the past year, has Mark been acting differently? Has he been secretive about money? Has he made any unusual purchases or payments?
Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, thinking. Well, he did buy that new car 6 months ago. He said he got a great deal on financing, but it seemed expensive for our budget. What else? He's been taking more business trips. Staying in nicer hotels, flying instead of driving. He said his company was doing well and covering more expenses. She paused. And he opened a new business account that he said was for tax purposes, but he never really explained what it was for. Mark was backing toward the patio door now, his face flushed with anger. I don't have to listen to this. Sarah, we're leaving. But Sarah remained seated, staring at her husband with growing realization. Mark, show me your phone. What? Show me your phone. Let me see your banking apps, your email, your recent activity. That's ridiculous. I'm not going to be interrogated in your mother's backyard based on her desperate accusations. If you have nothing to hide, then show me. Sarah, I'm your husband. You should trust me, not your criminal mother. The word criminal was a bridge too far. Sarah stood up, her face hard with determination I recognized from her childhood tantrums. Give me your phone, Mark. Right now. No. The single word fell between them like a stone into still water. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the house. Where are you going? Mark called after her. I'm calling Detective Morrison. If Mom is innocent, then someone else took that money. And right now, you're acting like someone with something to hide. Mark's mask slipped completely. Sarah, you don't understand. The money wasn't stolen, it was borrowed. I was going to pay it back. Sarah stopped in the doorway, her hand on the screen door handle. What did you just say? I borrowed the money. From your account. I was planning to replace it before anyone noticed. Borrowed it for what? Mark ran his hands through his hair, his expensive styling gel failing to maintain its hold. I had some investment opportunities. High return, short-term deals. I was going to double the money and put it back with extra for you. Using Mom's identity? I needed to move the money without you asking questions. I knew if I told you about the investments, you'd worry and want to discuss it with your family. This way was cleaner. Cleaner? Sarah's voice rose to near shouting. You framed my mother for financial fraud because it was cleaner? I sank back into my patio chair, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that the truth was finally coming out, horror at the depths of Mark's betrayal and manipulation. Sarah, Mark said, moving toward her with his hands outstretched, you have to understand, I did this for us. For our future. The investment opportunities one had access to could have set us up for life. What happened to the money, Mark? His silence was answer enough. What happened to the money? Sarah screamed. The investments didn't perform as expected. The market was more volatile than anticipated. But I can get it back, Sarah. I just need some time. You lost $73,000 of our money gambling on investments, and you let my mother get arrested for it? She wasn't arrested. And it wasn't gambling, it was calculated financial planning. Sarah looked at him with an expression of such contempt that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Get out, she said quietly. Sarah, please, let's talk about this rationally. Get out of my mother's house. Get out of my life. I never want to see you again. Sarah, you're my wife. We can work through this. No, we can't. You stole from me, you framed my mother, you lied to the police, and you let me believe the woman who raised me was a criminal. There's no working through that. Mark looked back and forth between Sarah and me, perhaps realizing for the first time that his carefully constructed lies were crumbling around him. Sarah, if you divorce me, you'll get half of nothing. I'm financially ruined. At least if we stay together, we can work together to rebuild. Then I'll have half of nothing instead of a whole marriage built on lies and theft. Mark gathered what remained of his dignity and walked toward the side gate that led to the driveway. At the gate, he turned back one more time.
Margaret, you should know that I never meant for this to hurt you. I thought I could replace the money before anyone noticed.
But you didn't mind letting me take the blame when your plan fell apart, I replied.
He had no answer to that.
The gate clicked shut behind him, and moments later we heard the BMW start and pull away. Sarah collapsed into her chair and began crying harder than I had seen her cry since she was a little girl. I went to her immediately, wrapping my arms around her shaking shoulders, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo and feeling the tension of the past 2 days begin to release from my body. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she sobbed against my shoulder.
"I'm so sorry. Shoo, baby girl. It's going to be okay. How can you forgive me? I believed him instead of you. I went to the police and accused you of being a criminal."
I held her tighter, stroking her hair the way I had when she was small.
"Because you're my daughter, and I love you more than life itself. And because Mark is very good at manipulation. He fooled both of us."
We sat together as the sun began to set, Sarah telling me about the subtle ways Mark had isolated her from our family over the past 2 years, how he had gradually taken control of every aspect of their financial life, how he had made her doubt her own judgment about money and numbers.
The classic patterns of financial abuse, though neither of us had recognized them at the time. "Mom, what do we do now? The police think you committed fraud. How do we prove what really happened?"
We call Detective Morrison and Patricia Wells, my attorney, and we tell them everything.
Mark's confession, the missing investment money, all of it. Will I have to testify against him?
I pulled back to look at her face, seeing my little girl despite her 28 years.
"Sarah, he stole from you and tried to frame me for it. Yes, you'll probably have to testify. Are you ready for that?"
She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I want him punished for what he did.
To both of us."
The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and statements. Detective Morrison arrived at my house within an hour of Sarah's call, listening with professional detachment as she recounted Mark's confession. Patricia Wells joined us by phone, walking us through the legal implications and the steps we would need to take to clear my name and pursue charges against Mark.
"The good news," Patricia explained, "is that Mark's confession essentially exonerates you, Mrs. Henderson. The district attorney will almost certainly drop any charges they might have been considering. The bad news is that recovering the stolen money is going to be much more complicated."
"I don't care about the money," Sarah said.
"I just want Mom's name cleared."
But I cared about the money, not for myself but for her. $73,000 represented years of Sarah's hard work, her savings for the future, her security. And now it was gone, evaporated in Mark's failed investment schemes.
Over the following weeks, the full scope of Mark's financial crimes became apparent.
He had not only stolen from Sarah's account but had also embezzled money from his employer and defrauded several private investment clients. The opportunities he had been chasing were barely disguised pyramid schemes and cryptocurrency scams that had collapsed as quickly as they had appeared. Mark was arrested on multiple fraud charges and eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more victims. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution that he would likely never be able to afford. Sarah moved back into her childhood bedroom while she figured out her next steps. The house she and Mark had bought together went into foreclosure, and she had to file for bankruptcy to escape the debts he had accumulated in their joint names. At 28, she was starting over with nothing but the clothes in her suitcase and the support of a family that loved her. "I feel so stupid," she said one evening as we sat in the kitchen sharing a simple dinner of soup and sandwiches.
"How did I not see what he was doing?"
"Because he was very good at what he did, and because you loved him."
"Love makes us vulnerable, but it also makes us human." "You're not stupid, Sarah.
You're trusting, and that's a beautiful quality, even when other people take advantage of it."
"I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust anyone again."
"You will.
It'll take time, but you will."
The alternative is to let Mark steal your ability to love in addition to everything else he took.
Don't give him that power.
As spring turned to summer, Sarah began to rebuild her life. She started freelance graphic design work from my home office, slowly establishing a new client base and regaining her financial independence. We spent long evenings talking about everything and nothing, repairing the relationship that Mark had tried so hard to undermine. One afternoon in July, she came into the kitchen where I was preparing dinner and stood watching me chop vegetables for what felt like several minutes. "Mom," she said finally, "I want you to know something." I looked up from the cutting board. "What's that, honey?" "Even when I thought you had taken the money, even when I was angry and confused and hurt, I never stopped loving you. I thought you had done something terrible, but I never stopped knowing that you were still my mother and that you loved me." I set down the knife and wiped my hands on the dish towel, then pulled my daughter into a tight embrace. "That's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me. I just wanted you to know. In case I hadn't said it clearly enough before. You don't need to keep apologizing, Sarah. We were both victims of Mark's lies. What matters is that we're here now, together, and we know the truth." That night, as I lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of my house settling around me, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible Tuesday morning in March. The phone call that had shattered my world had ultimately led to something I hadn't expected, a deeper, stronger relationship with my daughter than we had ever had before. The crisis had stripped away the polite surface conversations and forced us to confront fundamental questions about trust, love, and family. It had revealed Mark's true nature and ended a marriage that was built on deception, but it had also revealed the unbreakable bond between Sarah and me. Sarah eventually found a small apartment across town and moved out of my house, but she continued to visit several times a week. She met someone new eventually, a kind man who worked as a teacher and understood the importance of family. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully, with the wisdom that comes from having been betrayed before. I never fully recovered the money Mark had stolen, but I recovered something more valuable, the absolute certainty that my daughters loved me and that our family could survive even the most devastating attacks. The accusation of fraud had been cleared from my record, but more importantly, it had been cleared from my daughter's heart. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of early morning when the house is still and peaceful, I think about how close we came to losing each other forever. How Mark's lies might have permanently poisoned Sarah's trust in me, how the legal system might have branded me a criminal, how our family might have been destroyed by one man's greed and selfishness. But love, it turns out, is stronger than lies. Truth, it turns out, has a way of surfacing even when it's buried under layers of deception and manipulation. And family, real family built on genuine affection and mutual respect, can weather storms that would destroy relationships based on anything less solid. The phone still rings on Tuesday mornings, but now when I answer it, it's usually Sarah calling to check on me, or Jessica calling from Seattle, or my sister Ruth calling to chat about our mother or the weather or what we watched on television the night before. Normal phone calls from people who love me, not accusations from strangers who think they know who I am. I'm still the same woman who taught elementary school children to love books, who raised 2 daughters largely on my own after Robert died, who tends a small garden behind a modest house in suburban Denver. But I'm also someone who has looked false accusations in the face and emerged with my integrity intact. Someone who has watched her child make a terrible mistake and forgiven her completely. Someone who has learned that even the most carefully constructed lies eventually crumble when confronted with persistent truth and unwavering love. The worst day of my life led, in the end, to some of the best days. Not because the experience was pleasant, but because it tested everything I thought I knew about family and love and trust, and those things proved to be even stronger than I had dared to hope. Nobody imagines what happened, indeed. Nobody imagines that such betrayal is possible from someone you trust completely. But nobody imagines, either, how resilient love can be, how quickly truth rises to the surface when lies begin to crumble, or how much stronger a family can become when it survives an attack designed to destroy it from within. I was accused of fraud by my own daughter, and it was the most painful experience of my life. But it was also, in ways I never could have anticipated, one of the most valuable. It taught me that love doesn't mean believing someone blindly, but it does mean never giving up on them. It taught me that truth doesn't always win immediately, but it does always win eventually. And it taught me that the people who matter most will find their way back to you, even if they lose their way for a while. Sarah and I are closer now than we were before Mark entered our lives. We talk about real things, important things, without the superficial politeness that had crept into our relationship during her marriage. We've both learned to recognize manipulation and lies, to trust our instincts about people's motives, to value honesty even when it's uncomfortable. And sometimes, when we're sitting together in comfortable silence, I catch her looking at me with an expression of such love and gratitude that it takes my breath away. She knows what we almost lost, and she treasures what we saved.
As do I. The accusation nearly destroyed us, but in the end, it made us unbreakable.